Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcock's Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Business Casual. I'm Emma Henderson, managing editor of Aftermarket News, and with me today is founder of Seraph Consulting, Ambrose Conroy. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Emma. Thanks for having me on again.
Of course, we've had you on for several tariff videos that were independent of this podcast, so it seems appropriate to have you on now as tariffs are back in the news after a few weeks off. So I'd love to ask you, where do we stand with tariffs in the automotive aftermarket right now?
I think tariffs in the automotive aftermarket are becoming clearer, but there's still a lot of chaos and uncertainty. So what we do see right now is if you're manufacturing in USMCA, you're in a good spot. The tariffs on most goods are not in place. Most aftermarket parts, just like most OEM parts, are exempt from tariffs when they're fully USMCA compliant. The challenge comes when you don't have USMCA compliant parts. If you're bringing parts in from China, that's right now the worst case. If it's a steel or aluminum part, you can get the 50% rate, different stacking things. If it's just the part, you get a 45% rate. So you've got the 25% automotive part, and then you've got the stacking 20%. I call it the fentanyl tax that goes on top of that. So there's that. Those tariffs are all getting negotiated. India right now, they're working on a trade deal, but we've got notice that on the 26th of August, things will move. So India supplies a lot of aftermarket parts, as we all know. That looks like it will be 26% for the reciprocal tariff rate. And it's not clear for the automotive aftermarket parts if that will stack on top of, as China does, the 25% rate, or if it will just be 26. So there's a possibility of 51. And China could potentially go up significantly as well if a deal is not reached. A lot of this comes down to the discussions that are ongoing and what people read into this. And we're trying to analyze this in a lot of depth. We're trying to understand what Trump's doing here. And a lot of it seems to be posturing and positioning to get deals done. Trade deals take a lot longer than anyone expected. We're hearing India is being held up by agricultural discussions because they don't want the pesticides that we use in our food going into their country. So who knew that farm products that selling vegetables or meat in India would impact the automotive aftermarket? But in fact, it's impacting it today.
It's all linked together in some way, shape, or form these days.
It is. It's a really complex ecosystem.
Absolutely. So how does this impact the consumer behavior in the aftermarket then?
So we're seeing consumer behavior in general shifting, but they haven't stopped buying. So in the aftermarket right now, we're seeing consumer sentiments down across the board. So I'm working on a large industry report right now outside of automotive aftermarket, just the entire industry in general, the U.S. industrial based consumer behavior. We're seeing consumer sentiment is way down, but companies still expect consumers to buy and perform. So there's sort of an acceptance by the consumer that they're going to pay more for products. For the automotive aftermarket, I think that's good because it shows you can pass a significant part, if not all of the tariffs along to the consumer. Consumers are going to be keeping their cars longer. They're going to need to fix these cars. New car prices are higher. We're seeing a shift to repair. And there are some delays, but consumers understand that it's not going to cost them less to delay a repair. So they're pulling a lot of repairs ahead. I've got a car that needs to, we just had an engine blowout. So we've got to get that in. And we're debating between a reman or a new engine. And right now with the tariffs, the reman engine makes a lot more sense. So we're likely going to go down that road. But even the parts for that are getting imported. So we want to move fairly quickly. And we're likely going to get that started this week. We're also seeing used car prices continuing to rise a little bit. And that is a good incentive for consumers to go and put money into their existing vehicle to keep it on the road. People love their cars, they need their cars, and they want to keep their cars running. And there's this fear that it will cost more tomorrow. So there's a sense of urgency to get this done now. So we expect to see the aftermarket do well as consumers continue to fix their cars faster when they have the money to do it.
It's fix instead of buy new, essentially, is kind of the mindset.
And it's even fix because you may not be able to trade it in or trade it in on a used car. So even it's not even buy new, it's not buy used. With interest rates as high as they are right now, the monthly payment is higher. And normally dealers like to talk about monthly payments, and I don't like to talk about monthly payments. But as prices go up and interest rates are up, that payment is higher, and that pushes consumers not just not to buy a new car, also not to buy a used car, but to fix the car that they have and try to get a lot more out of it. And we know that automotive OEMs have done a lot to make their cars run longer, but things still break. So the aftermarket still needs to keep giving us both the consumable parts, so brake pads and rotors and windshield wipers, but also other things break. Some of the products in a car have an 80 or 100,000 mile real life, and those things need to get replaced. So I think the aftermarket is going to be very busy as consumers continue to spend to try to keep their cars running and running well for longer.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. And you kind of led into this, but I was curious what the impact of these tariffs would have on remanufacturers. And you already said you're considering a remanufactured part for your own vehicle right now.
We are. I think remanufacturers are in a great space. So the cores mostly come domestically, so you're avoiding that tariff. So if for an engine, for example, if you've got an import, rather than buying an engine that's shipped in from Europe or shipped in from somewhere else, if you can get it remanned here, you're not paying for that new engine and you're not paying that tariff. So automatically you're getting a 25% savings. And then a lot of the labor that's here, you've got reman shops that have availability. One of the things that's given me pause and why I didn't jump right into it is the timeline to get the engine remanufactured has stretched out, because I don't want just to use a core. I want them to rebuild the engine that I have. And because I want to do that, it could be 3 months for them to get this thing done. Now, if I would just take a core, they've got some engines off the shelf, but they've got far fewer than they normally have. So I think that the reman business will do really, really well if they can find enough people to fill the roles in the shop and keep the skills. Huge demand, and that will be very heavily supported by the tariffs, because the tariffs are going to make the new replacement parts much higher. So it will allow for the labor to be paid for and create jobs within the United States, which I think is a really great incentive. Although I also think that Mexico, where a lot of these products go down to get remanned, will do well, because you still get that exemption for the auto parts coming back in. So we'll wait and see, but I think there's huge potential for reman, and I expect reman business to increase and profits to increase within the remanufacturing space. So it's a great spot to be in right now.
And that'll be really interesting too, because there are people who maybe have never used a remanufactured part. And we all know that environmentally speaking, it is better for the environment to reuse parts as opposed to create new. So it'll be interesting to see if it shifts consumer sentiment when it comes to remanufactured parts as a whole.
Yeah, I think the circular economy, as you're talking about, is absolutely clear there. The remanufacturing is much better for the economy. We're not putting things in landfills. We're taking a lot of parts out, but you have those cores in whatever the part is, and it is saving a tremendous amount of energy. And normally that's not what's broken. There are other things that break, and it seals, its gaskets in an engine. And when those go, you have to get it fixed. But you have to take the whole thing apart. You change everything. The rings get changed. It becomes a real... it's a lot of work, a lot of manual work, but it creates great jobs. And I think consumers will be very accepting of remanufactured parts, which are great quality. I remember as a kid, that was the way we did things at home. You got remanufactured part because a remanufactured part, a reman part, was good, and it was the easiest way to do it. It was faster, it was cheaper, and it was just as reliable once it got done properly. So I think consumers will begin to have a lot more confidence in it. And I think that will expand this, especially with the focus that we've had in the past on the circular economy. People will also feel good about buying remanufactured parts. And I think in the blue states, that will probably carry remanufacturers further. In the red states, I think we'll see less focus on that. But I think overall, we will see a higher acceptance of remanufactured parts because it's going to be the easier way to go.
And so we talked a little bit about how consumers are feeling this sense of urgency right now. How does that play into uncertainty if it is there for a longer period of time? Like the longer we're waiting, the longer we don't know about tariffs or that they're in place at a high rate, how does that play into consumer uncertainty?
I think it's consumer and business uncertainty. I think consumers, from what we're seeing, what the data is showing us right now, consumer sentiment is falling, but businesses still expect consumers to spend. So I think there's a realization within the American consumer that they're going to be paying more for imported products. And unfortunately, there's very little that doesn't have an imported component to it in our country at this point in time. We haven't reindustrialized. We don't make enough here. So we're buying from China, we're buying from Europe, we're buying from everywhere else. And that is going to lead to higher prices. We've seen inflation in goods that's happened. We haven't really seen significant wage inflation yet, but we think that's coming. It's going to have to come in order for consumers to be able to continue to afford things. Consumers are just at a point right now, or appear to be based on the data, that they're accepting that things are going to cost more. As I mentioned earlier, they're pulling ahead some of the repairs. They're doing the fixes right now. People seem to be carrying more debt. They're spending more. We're seeing retail inventories higher, and we know in automotive aftermarket, people pulled ahead things. People have rushed to get things out of China, to get things out of India, to get things into the country before the reciprocal tariffs come back in. And if they can move ahead, they'll hold this inventory, but there's still a cost to that. The cost of credit is higher than it's been. Companies could be paying 8, 10, 12% to carry that inventory. So while they're avoiding the 25% or 50% tariff, they are still paying more for that part, and that price increase has to get passed on to the consumer. Consumers are seeing that. Consumers are paying more. They're not happy about it, but they don't really have a choice because it costs less to fix your vehicle than it does to increase your payment on a new-to-you used car or a new vehicle. And new vehicles are just so expensive right now. The average price is about $48,000. We're predicting tariffs will take that up to about $54,000. So if you do that and you have higher interest rates than people are used to, payments are up significantly. And that's just a significant incentive to continue to fix the car that you have, which helps the aftermarket industry. And we need to, as an aftermarket industry, be prepared and be ready to support consumers as they continue to keep their cars on the road longer.
Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcox Media.
So I'm curious what's at stake during these ongoing tariff negotiations, especially with the countries that are seeing the larger tariffs imposed upon them by the current administration.
I think there's a lot in place here. The Trump administration is betting, and rightly so, that foreign markets need the U.S. consumer. U.S. consumers are willing to pay a lot more for goods. We see it with aftermarket parts. We see it with pharmaceuticals. We see it with just about everything that's shipped into the country. A lot of Americans see many foreign goods as luxury goods, and we've sort of lost the whole value of made in the USA, which we're trying to rebuild. The countries themselves right now are struggling with different regulations that they have internally. The EU is having a hard time trying to get all the member states aligned so that they can come up with tariff proposals and plans that will work for everyone there. And that's not a quick fix. To get anything through the EU takes months and months and months. So I think European companies, people here that are buying from Europe, will see higher tariffs. I think countries like India, what I'm hearing now is they're struggling with agricultural tariffs. Other things have been agreed, but they don't want the food that we have getting sold in there because of pesticides, because of antibiotics, because of other things. I'm hearing those reports coming out of those negotiations, and I find that really interesting. Kennedy at the FDA seems to be taking a different view on that. Everybody has different views here, but that gives me pause. It also says that it's really hard for countries to just adjust to what the US wants. China is the big outlier and a massive player for the aftermarket industry. China right now is using trade war levers. It's the rare earths that they're pulling on. They've shut down Ford's production lines because of not releasing rare earths. They're limiting the licenses that they're giving. So each country, each bloc around the world seems to be dealing with these things very, very differently. The deals have been much slower than expected. President Trump has said he's not going to extend the deadline any more than August 1st. We'll see. He said things like that before, so a lot of this could be positioning. But I'm of the mindset now that we're going to have tariffs. They're going to hit. Bessent was saying the United States has collected $100 billion in tariffs so far. But the most interesting thing to me right now is that tariffs didn't make it into the one big beautiful bill that just got passed. So tariffs are nowhere in there. So these tariffs are still a presidential prerogative. President Trump has put these in place, and they can go away by the stroke of a pen, just as they were put in by the stroke of a pen. They're not legislated. And there's a lot of lawsuits going through right now. If that had been in the legislation, then we'd have clarity. But I think we're going to be living with chaos for years to come. And it's going to just be painful. My advice to everyone that we're talking to is that you need a plan on these things coming through, because I don't think the countries that aftermarket does the most business with will be able to get trade deals in place fast enough. So we'll likely go to those reciprocal tariff rates, which will be higher than we're paying now.
And speaking of the big, beautiful bill, is there anything in this recent budget that just passed that the aftermarket should be paying attention to outside of the tariff world?
I think there's accelerated depreciation on investment, R&D, and infrastructure within the United States. From my perspective, that's a really interesting thing. So if you're setting up lines to do work in the United States, you can get incentives there. If you have delivery vehicles, if you're buying cars, there's accelerated depreciation on those as well. There's some enhanced interest rate deductibility on different things. So if you're investing in your business, that tends to be major. What's not there, and what really is kind of sad, the 15% incentive for those that would manufacture in the United States, that tax rate that was really pushed aggressively as part of the tariff discussion on the campaign trail, hasn't materialized. That seems to have been forgotten. So we're not seeing a lower tax rate for manufacturers. So the incentive to make that significant investment within the United States seems to be down. So I think for the aftermarket, we're going to see those some of the smaller incentives. The one thing that I think also people should be aware of is the de minimis exemption is going away. So in 2027, that de minimis exemption, if you are buying small parts in, if you could package things and get less than $800 on an invoice and not pay the duty, that was a huge incentive. That is going away across the board in 2027. So if you're flying into the airport and you've got things that you bought for personal use or gifts, you can still bring in $800. But for commercial goods, that's going away. So I think that's another thing that the aftermarket needs to be aware of. So talk to your tax advisors, understand what's going on out there. The bill is written, it's there, interpretations are still going on. I think that the way the IRS is going to interpret the deductibility of interest rates of accelerated depreciation is still being it's being codified a bit more, but the bill does offer some incentives if you're making CapEx investments to make those investments and be able to take that savings quickly.
So basically, it sounds like the main point of this is really educate yourself and make sure you truly understand what is in this piece of legislation.
I think that's absolutely right, that your CFO, your financial advisors, your controllers should all be very, very familiar with the legislation as it's passed. Go through the different items that may impact you. The IRS is still figuring out how to implement this. So you want to make sure that you're aligned, your accounting team is booking things the right way, and you're planning your investments. CapEx in particular is something to really make sure that you're aligned with before you go and spend it. We saw a huge freeze on capital expenditure the first half of this year. People are starting to try to figure out how do they spend the money they've allocated, but it's not happening quickly. So being aware, following through, giving your financial team the authority to make the right decisions and help guide you is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And so this is your first time on this podcast. We've never had you do this before, but we like to ask people their aftermarket three things, people, moments that serve as a reminder as to why you're in the aftermarket. And it sounds like for you, there's a lot of urgent things that are keeping you very active in this industry.
Well, there are a whole lot of urgent things that are keeping me active, and I like this question. It's a good one. It's going to cause me to think for a minute. I think we've got amazing people, and I think the resilience of the people, the way that they're dealing with the constant change, the supply chain turbulence that we're seeing because of tariffs isn't new for the aftermarket. We've been dealing with this for years. People understand how to deal with this. They're working through it. They've got plans, and I think they're handling it better than most other industries. We can raise prices a little bit. We're understanding our pricing levers. We're seeing some things moving back into the USMCA market. But the people, for me, are absolutely critical. We've got fabulous people that are resilient, can think on their feet, and make good decisions. I think the second thing for me is new and used vehicle prices going up with higher interest rates. So you'd ask, why does that matter to aftermarket? I think when people have a higher payment to buy a new or new to them car, they're going to spend more money to keep their vehicle running. And with the tariff chaos and the fear that people will use the last pre-tariff part that they have in inventory and they'll have to pay more, I'm seeing people move faster to replace things and fix things. It's even happening to me with the engine that I've got to deal with. I'm making a decision far faster, and I'm not just buying a new car. I'm going to fix what I have and keep going with it. The third and final thing I think is I'm going to go back to tariffs, and I think that it's really making sure that you understand from a tariff perspective how this could impact you. And my first comment was about people and resilience. You map out what you could do. You have that plan, and you know where you can source products. If you've got suppliers that can give you things out of China, out of India, and out of Mexico, you've got the capacity to source enough out of Mexico that you can source your basic demand, and you pull in the minimum amount from the lowest tariff impact country that you can. I think that's normal in the aftermarket business. I think people do that anyway, and they're resilient enough, and they have the models to show them what to do. So I think those would be my three things. One is, again, people. Second would be the new car or used car prices going up and payments being higher. And the third is the tariff piece and how you can resiliently source from the lowest tariff environment to give the best price to the consumer so you can keep selling as much as you can and keep cars on the road. Without the aftermarket industry, we wouldn't have cars on the road, and it would make things really, really difficult. So we're all doing good work here.
Absolutely. Ambrose, thank you so much for joining us today. As you said, it's a time of a little bit of chaos, so who knows, we may have you back on the podcast relatively soon if we see some massive changes. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you guys so much for watching.
Thank you, Emma.